Why does a good, all-powerful God allow suffering? Now, this is not just some philosophical dilemma, but it's a theological necessity to address. And today we're exploring what the Bible teaches about suffering, not just emotionally, but theologically. Let's look at suffering through a framework we all understand, the seasons of life. This will provide structure for how Scripture presents suffering as formative, not incidental. Let's start by asking the question, what is the theology of suffering? Well, the theology of suffering is a biblical understanding of why pain exists, what role it plays in our life, and how God interacts with us in the midst of it. And just like the earth has seasons, so do our lives. Spring brings new life. Summer brings growth. Fall brings change. Winter brings barrenness and cold. But here's the key. Every season serves a purpose. In biblical theology, suffering is not peripheral. It is central to the redemptive story, from the curse in Genesis 3, the suffering of Christ, to the groanings of creation in Romans 8. Rather than viewing suffering as a breakdown of God's plan, the Bible presents it as a component of his providential work, often with intentional ends, refinement, discipline, dependency, revelation. So why does this theology matter? Because how we interpret suffering really shapes how we endure it. If we think pain means that God has abandoned us, we spiral into despair. But if we have an understanding that suffering as a season, perhaps a winter that God uses to deepen our roots, we gain strength, perspective, and a lot of hope. Romans 5:3-5 says that suffering produces endurance, character, hope. 1 Peter tells us that it refines us like gold. Now, that does not minimize pain, but it reminds us that pain is never wasted. So how does God use seasons of suffering in our lives? Well, let's look at the seasons of nature and do some relation with that. So first of all, there's winter, and this represents loss, grief, barrenness. Yet beneath the surface, root systems, they deepen during this time. So spiritually, suffering often initiates this dependence. It forces us to relinquish this illusionary control that we think we have. Then there's fall. In nature, this is when trees shed. Biblically, God often strips us of attachments. Think about Abraham and Isaac, to produce this clarity, this faithfulness. And theologically, this reflects divine discipline that we see in Hebrews 12. Then there's a season of spring. It's this period of recovery, of blooming. It aligns with our sanctification. Newness, being created new. New disciplines, new relationships, new understandings of God are established in our life. And then there's summer, and this represents seasons of stability, spiritual productivity. And these are not ends in themselves, but outcomes of prior workings from the refinement that God has done in our life. None of these seasons are static. None of them are accidental. Scripture shows us that suffering is not evidence of God's absence, but an indicator of his active work. So we can sum it up like this. The theology of suffering demands more than comfort. It demands clarity. If we are to be biblically and theologically literate, we must understand suffering is not a contradiction of God's character, but as a means by which his character is revealed and formed inside of us. Thanks for watching. If this helped you in any way, subscribe for more bite-sized theology to help you understand your walk with God in every season of your life. If you're in the middle of a hard one, drop a comment below. I'd love to pray for you or point you to more resources and encouragement.